Another guy who seems like he's going to be on this defensive staff moving forward is Steve Clinkscale, or Chris Ballas reporting again on Thursday morning that he is likely to stay at Michigan. Jim Harbaugh was trying to court him to the Los Angeles Chargers, and that could still happen at some point. I mean, at one point it looked like Ben Herbert was going to stay, but then it seemed like Los Angeles upped their offer, and he ends up with the Chargers in the NFL. So not saying that, this is a completely done deal, but it does seem like he has, given the indication that he's going to stay. And look, I mean, I think Steve Clinkscale probably wants to be the defensive coordinator at Michigan. He's the co-DC right now and secondary coach, but it definitely feels like Sharon Moore wants to go with an outside hire, somebody with experience running this defense. Joe Cullen checks that box. Certainly Wink Martindale checks that box. Maybe the originator of this defense. And, that's kind of the direction they're at right now, but it's not a small thing that Steve Clinkscale is likely to stay at Michigan because of the job he's done with the defensive backs over the last 3 years, the job he does on the recruiting trail. He's a culture guy too. I mean, he just keeps everybody in line. I mean, it is funny. Like, I know I've mentioned this a couple times probably throughout the years on the show, but anytime you ask a guy what it's like to play for Steve Clinkscale, their first inclination is to start laughing. They let out a little chuckle, and then they say that they love it. But it's not an easy thing to play for Clink. But he gets these guys better. He develops them, and they end up loving him at the end of the day. And I think that's just a guy that you need around on this defensive staff.
Yeah, I mean, having him stick around is key. I mean, Will Johnson is a guy that kind of came to Michigan ready out of the box, but when you look at the guys that have developed under his watch, and remember, remember everyone panicking after Maurice Linguist left for Buffalo. Was it just before the spring game or just after? I forget what it was exactly.
Yeah, it was well after. Yeah, it was like almost in the summer. I think like April or May.
Yeah, when you look at I just think back to that COVID season when the primary corners were, was it Jamon Green and Vincent Gray? Does that sound right?
In going into
COVID season.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, you look at, I don't want people to have to relive this and think about it, but when you think about how Michigan lost that Michigan State game that year, and then you're pretty much running it back with those guys that next season under Clink, the strides that those guys made was incredible. And then DJ Turner breaks out. Obviously you have Will Johnson break out last year. Jamon Green develops. All of these guys this year. Josh Wallace, a guy comes in from UMass, probably pretty ready to play, but develops into an all Big Ten caliber type of cornerback. So with Michigan, they go into next season with a lot of the same questions that they had going into last season in terms of who's going to be that number two on the other side of Will Johnson, who's going to be Mikey Sainer still gone, who's going to play the nickel. This guy, I think, is maybe the most critical of the guys that were left or that are left and are on the board. Probably the most critical guy left to retain, because I do think he has a Midas touch on the recruiting trail. I think he has a Midas touch in terms of developing and cultivating talent in the secondary. And again, listen, all of that being said, if Sharon, look how quickly Sharon Moore made his decision on offensive coordinator. Like he said at the press conference, he had a guy in mind to call the plays. If a guy like Steve Clinkscale or a guy like Mike Elston, if he had that same type of conviction about them as candidates to run this Michigan defense, I think that would be done already. And it's no disrespect to those guys, but who would know better than a coordinator or a guy that's been on Jim Harbaugh's staff as your new head coach that has been in the room with these guys? And it's not, again, no disrespect intended at all. I think Clink and really Mike Elston are phenomenal position coaches, and you see that on film with the guys that they develop. But maybe Clink is one of those guys where a year or two down the road, he develops that feel for calling a defense or whatever it is, and he's your next defensive coordinator. I don't know. He's going to keep that co-defensive coordinator tag as long as he's there. For now, it seems like. And I get it; it's a coaching change, and there might be some rough feelings at times. But when the dust settles, and if he's still on the staff, it's go time. And I don't think there'd be sour grapes. I don't think there'd be some kind of mutiny or anything like that. That's a guy that's very much all about his business. And as long as he's at Michigan, I think that will remain the case.